So any work which exposes you to dust, which you inhale, may lead to occupational lung diseases.
We went gold hunting in Mubende, and that's where I contracted this illness.
These small particles of heavy metals, if they lodge into your lungs continuously, they'll cause slow chronic inflammation.
Some who may not go off oxygen and they need oxygen for a lifetime.
It becomes a disadvantage to other patients who would have used the bed.
In the shadows of industry and disease, two stories unfold, different paths, but the same battle to breathe. Artisanal miners exposed to silica dust and toxic fumes are at a high risk of severe respiratory illnesses.
mwaka mulamba nenga nabujja mu Kirombe Mubende.
We went gold hunting in Mubende, and that's where I contracted this illness. We used to crawl deep under the tunnels of the mines without oxygen packs, and spent down there 2 to 3 days without resurfacing. As time passed by, I started having difficulties in breathing, and then one day I collapsed. Many of our colleagues at the mines have died.
Occupational lung diseases are a common entity, especially as we advance towards a middle-income country. And these are diseases that manifest secondary to the job one finds himself in. Mostly of them are related to exposure to dust, and this dust may come in all sorts of forms. It could be in the mining industry, for example, in agriculture, and in construction. And also it can be innocuous exposure, like maybe in domestic settings, like cooking, smoke, and other conditions. So those are some of the possible triggers, but the biggest culprit is a material called silica. Silica is found in the Earth's crust. It composes about 25% of the Earth's crust. So you find it in dust, in soil, and all sorts of material. So any work which exposes you to dust, which you inhale, may lead to occupational lung diseases. There are other occupational lung diseases, like in agriculture. You'll say, like in sugarcane manufacturing, there's what we call bagasosis, inhalation of material from the molasses and so on. In cotton industry, there are also a condition called bicyanosis. So all productive sectors expose the worker at risk. The challenge with this is these are the most productive sector of the population, and when they're exposed and they fall sick, of course, the individuals suffer, their families suffer, the economy suffers. So it is indeed a very important aspect of chronic lung diseases.
Kati wano mazeewo emyezi girenga 3 sikirizi bagenda waka kuba sina oxygen. Kuba wentuuka waka nyinza ofuna ataaka ate okuva waka okutubuka magamba genda Mulago. Kati wotuukire Mulago kiba too late. Era naye Katonda anyamba buyambi. Kuba wano oyinza okumalawo wiiki singa 2 ne bakusibula ng'otereddemu. ogera otuuka waka gusinga emu bakuleeta ofa, bakuleeta ozirise ng'otaawa. Ate obulwaliro bw'okumpi tebwagala kuba tebusobola mawuggwe, bakugamba ddayo Mulago, ddayo Mulago.
The moment you discharge these patients home without giving them oxygen means you've really written a death sentence. And the causes are many. Some, majority are due to autoimmune diseases. Those are diseases which come when the body is reacting to itself. But also there are some preventable causes, like exposure to heavy metals, a condition which we call silicosis in the medical terms. These small particles of heavy metals, if you're working in a mining industry, the stone quarries or the builders who use those kind of materials, if they lodge into your lungs continuously, they will cause slow chronic inflammation, long-term inflammation, where the lung becomes fibrosed and then the exchange of oxygen is affected, and then you become oxygen dependent. In Mulago National Referral Hospital, we have a clinic where we see patients with chronic lung diseases or lung diseases in general. And when such patients present, we carry out investigations, the lab tests, radiology investigations, including CT scan, and other investigations, including bronchoscopy. When these patients are put on oxygen, they improve and they feel better. But then they cannot go home because they need oxygen and they cannot have enough oxygen from the air if they go back home. So we have long-stay patients. Actually, the longest has stayed with us for 1.5 years. So you can imagine a cost of a patient occupying one bed. That means you can't admit any other patient just because the patient needs oxygen.
For Okiring Moses, a 28-year-old Itesot, little did he envisage that what commenced as a simple cough would be a turning point of his life. From a vibrant, healthy hospital lab attendant to a stagnated man pinned onto a hospital bed only to breathe through tubes in order to see tomorrow.
When I first got sick, I thought it was just a bad cough, but then it didn't stop. I kept on buying cough syrups at the local pharmacies, but the cough just wouldn't go. My breath was increasingly getting hard, mixed with bouts of intensive body heat and sweating at night, including cold nights. One day, my wife insisted on taking me to a bigger hospital on her bills. And when I got there, I was diagnosed with tuberculosis, to my shock.
People need to seek early medical attention so that they are given medication that will reduce the effect of that reaction of the body reacting against itself and damaging some of the body parts, including the lungs. Of course, the challenge at hand is the patients we have on the ward. Currently, I think we have about 10 of them. They cannot do without oxygen.
Tuberculosis leaves lasting scars, making the lungs vulnerable and dependent on oxygen therapy. Okiring is one of the many whose late search for medical attention has cornered him into depending on oxygen for the rest of his life. Both silicosis from mining and tuberculosis cause irreversible lung damage. Patients like these require long-term oxygen therapy to survive. Preventive measures and early detection are crucial.
So we admit patients when they are acutely ill and we try to stabilize them. There are several measures including physiotherapy, counseling, and which we hope can help to improve their condition. However, there are some who may not go off oxygen and they need oxygen for a lifetime. So that one needs to be planned for and such that they can have oxygen even at home. Because if you talk to the patients, their desire is actually to be with their families in their homes. But the limiting factor is failure to access oxygen. If your body has low oxygen, your lungs cannot inhale enough oxygen, then the body is not able to function properly. So it's one important element that the body needs.
Of course, the challenge at hand is the patients we have on the ward. Currently, I think we have about 10 of them. They cannot do without oxygen. We've seen in developed countries where people who are oxygen dependent, they are manufacturers who make some kind of packs which people carry, and they contain oxygen concentrators, and then these people have the oxygen administration apparatus like nasal prongs, which are put over their nose, and they are able to move around while they still can be receiving oxygen as they move around, and they can at least look after themselves.
Whereas oxygen dependence may not necessarily translate into a death sentence, the burden of an indefinite stay in a hospital setting isn't one to go without social consequences.
We are two brothers nursing our mother. Back home we have siblings and 2 toddlers. We lost our jobs and so did our mother. The little we gather from well-wishers is all spent on hospital bills. All our siblings back home missed out on exams first and ultimately dropped out of school. We are back to square one. We've hit rock bottom. I'm broke. I'm indebted. We are all impoverished. My relatives have sold everything to foot medical bills, and there's nothing left to sell anymore. I can hardly afford special meals as advised by doctors. I have to depend on what the hospital provides.
Your challenge number 1 is having a patient who is occupying this bed for more than 1 month, 2 months. It becomes a disadvantage to other patients who would have used the bed. Yes. And that may force us to have floor cases, which is not allowed in good practice settings like Mulago. There are others who are from needy backgrounds and they may not afford certain investigations like chest x-rays, ultrasound scans, CT scans, and we come in to give a service of waiving, assess the patient's ability to pay or inability to pay, and we recommend for a waiver. There is a waivers committee in the hospital, and they follow assessment reports from social work and the ward in charges, and they are able to waive off payments, and the needy patients are able to get free services.
We're looking at if we got a patient an oxygen concentrator, and you buy that oxygen concentrator on which you can load an inflatable oxygen bag. That means the patient has to have at least 2. When he's using one bag, the other bag is on this oxygen concentrator, and the concentrator is making more oxygen that goes into the bag, and then when the one bag is exhausted, you can load the other one. But that means that this patient must be in a place where there's electricity, because this oxygen concentrator will work only on power. Then, of course, you need another small gadget to keep monitoring your oxygen levels in your blood. Otherwise, in case the concentrator is not giving you high enough oxygen concentration, and then your oxygen levels are going low, you can easily collapse and die. So you need a pulse oximeter that checks your oxygen levels. So this package, looking at it in Uganda shillings, for each patient would be about 13 million. But that would mobilize the patient to be ambulant, be at home rather than be in the hospital.
The burden of oxygen-dependent patients is immense. We are not just talking about machines and cylinders. It's the cost of care, the emotional toll on families, and the pressure on the already stretched resources of the hospital.
Mobilization of patients to be discharged to a home environment alone reduces the cost of care, because families have to come to keep checking on the patient, providing ABC, yet the patient can also be a little bit more productive. So my appeal is that we either request government to provide us funds to be able to put this package together for these patients, or families put together these resources to be able to mobilize their patients to be discharged and continue with their care, which is literally oxygen therapy at home.
Call upon the government to help us. We have been discussing this in our audit meetings, but we have not gotten a response. But we call upon our government to come up with a solution. How can we deal with these patients who are overstayed, who stay long in the hospital? They have a lot to do. Their relatives, they spend a lot of money. The relatives are here for the whole year. They are spending money on eats, they are spending money on drugs, they are spending money on everything. So we pray the government to come up with a solution to help our patients recover very fast, and even if they are at home, they are on oxygen. We have a scarcity of oxygen cylinders. Usually here, when we treat a patient and has recovered, it's just oxygen dependent. We advise them, those who have money, to buy cylinders. And if they are going to buy cylinders, they have to buy 2 cylinders. And it is very expensive than, two cylinders are expensive because they have to have one at home, and when it gets finished, they have to replace with another one, and they bring another one for refill.
Kati mbalesaba gavumenti etuyambe tugondezeeko tufunye zisirinda za oxygen ng'osobola okugenda waka n'oba ofunye ataaka yonna nga weeteekako bwetiisi n'osobola okutuuka mu ddwaliro awali abasawo bo. Oba omukono oguli bweru gutukwatamu oba abazungu batuyambeko. Batuyinza ne ku ddagala, kuba eddagala lya bbeeyi terigulikako. Eddagala litandika $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 okusobola okubeezaawo obulamu.
Behind every breath is a story of resilience. And behind every story is a chance to make a difference. I hope one day oxygen-dependent patients don't only get the air they need, but also the hope they deserve.